Kioma stood at the front of the church, her hands trembling as she held the prayer beads her husband, Yugo, had given her on their wedding day. The air was thick with grief, the mourners whispering quietly as they watched her, the widow, the woman left behind. Yugo's sudden death was still a mystery. No one knew how it happened. One moment, he was alive, and the next, he was gone. But that wasn't the worst part. As Kioma stared at the coffin, her mind wandered back to the strange feeling that had gripped her the night before Yugo's death. He had seemed nervous, fidgety, like he was keeping a secret. "Don't worry, Kioma," he had told her. "Everything is fine." But it wasn't fine. And now, with him gone, she was left to pick up the pieces. Just as the service was about to end, a man in a dark suit approached her. His face was hidden behind dark glasses, and his presence seemed out of place among the mourners. He held out an envelope to her, his hands cold as he passed it over. "For you," he said quietly, and before Kioma could respond, he was gone. Kioma opened the envelope slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with words written in shaky handwriting. "You'll be next if you don't return what he stole." Her breath caught in her throat. The note made no sense. What had Yugo stolen? And why had someone left it for her? She glanced around, but the man was nowhere to be seen. The church, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. Her peaceful life had just been shattered, and she had no idea who to trust or what to do next. "Kioma," a voice called from behind her. It was her son, Chuka. He had been standing in the back of the church, his eyes red from crying. His face was a mix of confusion and concern. "Mum, what's wrong?" Kioma turned to face him, her mind racing. She had to keep her son safe. But first, she needed to figure out what Yugo had gotten into. The mystery had begun. Kioma sat at the kitchen table, the note from the stranger lying before her like a silent threat. Her hands shook as she picked it up again, the words burning into her mind. "You'll be next if you don't return what he stole." What had Yugo gotten himself into? Chuka sat across from her, his eyes wide with worrying. "Mum, what's happening? What's in the note?" Kioma couldn't answer him right away. How could she explain the fear creeping into her heart when she didn't even understand it herself? She looked at her son, his youthful face full of innocence, and knew she couldn't burden him with everything. Not yet. "Chuka, I don't know," she finally said, her voice shaky. "But we need to find out what your father was hiding." Chuka leaned forward. "You think it has to do with what happened to him? How he died?" Kioma nodded. She still couldn't shake the feeling that Yugo's death wasn't an accident. It was too sudden, too strange. And now this note, whoever had left it knew something she didn't. "I need to go through his things," she said, standing up. "There's got to be something, anything that will explain this." Chuka stood too, his face pale. "Mum, I don't want you to go alone. I'll help." Kioma hesitated. Her son wasn't a child anymore, but she had always protected him. Yet, something in Chuka's eyes told her he wanted to be part of this. Maybe he knew more than he was letting on. Maybe he had always known. "I'll be fine," she said softly, even though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. She led Chuka to their bedroom. The room still smelled faintly of Yugo's cologne, and it hit Kioma harder than she expected. His things were scattered around his shoes, his clothes, the watch he always wore. It felt like he was just away on a trip, but he wasn't. He was gone. She went through the drawers, the closet, and then finally, the hidden compartment beneath the floorboard where Yugo had kept things he didn't want anyone to find. As she pried it open, a small, black box lay inside. Kioma's heart skipped. It was locked. "This is it," she whispered to herself, her hands trembling. What was in the box? What had Yugo kept from her? She needed to find out before it was too late. Kioma stared at the locked box in her hands. the weight of it too heavy for her heart to bear. The box was small, plain, nothing remarkable about it. But the way it was hidden, the way Hugo had gone to such lengths to keep it safe, made her believe it held secrets too dangerous to ignore. She glanced at Chuka, who stood by the door, his arms crossed. His eyes were filled with an unfamiliar intensity. "Mum, do you think Dad was involved in something bad? Something that might have killed him?" Kioma didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air, thick with fear. She had always trusted. Hugo believed in the quiet strength of the man who had been her partner, her love. But now, with each passing day, the man she thought she knew seemed more like a stranger. What if he had been hiding something from her all along? "I don't know," Kioma finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I have to find out." She searched the room for something that could open the box. Her fingers brushed over the old silver key hanging on a chain above her dresser. It was Hugo's key, a key he never let anyone touch. For a moment, she hesitated. Could she really use it? Could she really risk uncovering what lay inside the box? Chuka stepped forward. "Mum, you can't do this alone. Please, let me help." Kioma swallowed hard, then nodded. She had no choice but to trust him. She knew Chuka had been distant lately, but this moment felt different. She could see the fear in his eyes, but also something else, a determination, a sense of purpose. Together, they stood by the box, and Kioma carefully slid the key into the lock. The click echoed in the silent room, and her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside, there were stacks of old papers, yellowed with age, and a few photographs. But what caught Kioma's eye was a small, intricately carved pendant. It glowed faintly in the dim light, almost as if it had a life of its own. Chuka gasped. "What is that, Mum?" Kioma picked up the pendant, her fingers trembling. The carving on it was familiar, too familiar. She had seen it before, many years ago, in her grandmother's house. But it couldn't be. She turned to Chuka. This is the symbol of the society. The one your father was trying to get out of." Chuka's eyes widened in shock. What society? Kioma's mind raced, memories flooding back. A dark, secretive group tied to her husband's past. A past he had never shared with her. Hugo had been running from someone, and now, it seemed, the past had come to claim him. And now, it was coming for her. The pendant was the key to everything. Kioma knew that much. But what else would it unlock? What had Hugo stolen that was worth killing for? The days after, Kioma found the pendant felt like they were slipping through her fingers, each moment dragging her deeper into a world she never knew existed. The threats had started to feel closer, more real. She could no longer shake the feeling that someone was always watching. Someone who knew what she had uncovered. Chuka was no help. He spent most of his time locked in his room, headphones on, eyes glued to the screen of his phone. Kioma knew he was struggling with the weight of his father's secrets, but she couldn't afford to wait. She had to act. The first call came at night. Kioma was sitting on the couch, her hands still trembling from earlier that day when she received a message with an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to us. Bring it to the old warehouse by the river tomorrow night, or you and your son will regret it." Kioma felt the blood drain from her face. Her breath became shallow, her head spinning. She gripped the phone tight, her knuckles turning white. Who were these people? What did they want? The warehouse by the river was a known place for shady deals. A place people went and never came back. She knew that if she went, it might be the end. But if she didn't, she wasn't sure what was worse. The pendant, the papers, the threats, they all pointed to something bigger, something darker. But what was it? What was so valuable that Hugo had been willing to risk everything for? Kioma sat still, her mind racing. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, reminding her that time was running out. Tomorrow night. She couldn't let Chuka find out. He was already in enough danger. The last thing she wanted was for him to get caught up in whatever mess Hugo had left behind. The next morning, Kioma made her decision. She would go alone. She didn't tell Chuka where she was going. Instead, she left a note on the kitchen table. A simple, loving message telling him to stay safe. She didn't know if she would come back. The drive to the warehouse was nerve-wracking. Every turn felt like a step closer to a trap. And yet, her heart told her she had no choice. She had to end it. Whatever this was, whatever danger lay ahead, she would face it head-on. As she approached the warehouse, her car headlights illuminating the large, rusted building in front of her, Kioma noticed a figure standing by the entrance. Her stomach twisted into a knot. She knew immediately it was a man from the message. The figure waved her forward, and she had no choice but to obey. Taking a deep breath, Kioma stepped out of the car. Every step she took towards the shadowy figure felt like it could be her last. Kioma stood before the dark, looming warehouse, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. The figure waiting by the entrance was tall, his face hidden in the shadows. But Kioma knew he was one of the men who had been following her. The cold night air clung to her skin, making her shiver despite the heat of her fear. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. This was it, the final moment. She could either expose everything, or she could walk away and protect her son. But she knew deep down that walking away wasn't an option anymore. The truth had to come out. The man stepped forward as she approached. "You brought it?" he asked, his voice gruff. Kioma nodded slowly, pulling the pendant from her bag. It felt heavy in her hand, as if it was weighing her down with the secrets it carried. "Good," the man said, "but that's not all you owe us." Kioma's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" The man chuckled darkly, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Your husband didn't just steal this, did he? He was part of something much bigger, a deal that involved people you wouldn't want to mess with." Kioma's mind raced. She had always known there was more to Hugo's life than she had understood. But this was beyond anything she had imagined. Powerful figures in the community were involved, figures who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The man stepped closer, his face now just a few inches away. "Your husband made a mistake, Kioma. He should have known better than to think he could get away with it. Now you and your son are paying the price." Kioma's hands clenched into fists. "No one is going to hurt my son," she said, her voice cold and steady. "What exactly do you want?" The man sneered, shaking his head. "It's not about what we want anymore. It's about what you're going to do to survive. You can walk away with your life and keep your mouth shut, or..." Before he could finish, Kioma's phone rang. She jumped, startled. She quickly glanced at the screen. It was Chuka. Her heart skipped a beat. Was he safe? Had he figured out where she had gone? With shaking hands, she answered the call. But before she could speak, Chuka's voice came through, frantic and panicked. "Mom, you need to get out of there. They're coming for you," he shouted, his words filled with urgency. "I know what happened. I found it all out. The papers, the money. It's not just Dad. They want you both." Kioma's mind went into overdrive. She had no time to think. The man was watching her, waiting for her to make a decision. In a split second, she knew what she had to do. She dropped the pendant on the ground in front of him, her eyes locking with his. "You want it, take it." Before he could react, Kioma turned and ran, heart racing. She didn't look back. Behind her, she heard the man shout in anger. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her son's voice echoed in her head, pushing her forward. She had to get to him. He was her reason. As she ran toward her car, her thoughts raced. She didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was clear, the truth was dangerous. But the most dangerous thing of all was not fighting for the ones you loved. She wasn't going to let them take her family. Kioma sped off into the night, her eyes on the road ahead. The world was changing, but she wasn't about to let it swallow her whole. Whatever the future held, she would face it. She would fight for herself, for her son, and for the truth.